Hi, and welcome to this latest immigration law conversation video. In these videos, I have informal chats with experts on immigration law, and we talk about current issues. These are not meant as legal advice, but hopefully they're a helpful source of information to you. And today I'm joined by a returning guest. He's come back for a round two. It's Gary McIndoe from Latitude Law. Gary, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Adam.
It's great to have you here, and we're going to talk about sponsoring foreign workers and the new points-based system. In case anybody didn't see our last video, just tell us a bit about you, your firm, and what you do.
I'm Managing Director at Latitude Law, based in Manchester. We have an office in Liverpool as well. We specialise in immigration work, so handle a mix of private client and corporate stuff. We do all aspects of immigration, essentially. The corporate side of things definitely is a bigger concern for us these days, and I think with the new rules that we're going to talk about today, it's going to potentially become more of a focus for our practice going forward.
Absolutely. Now, there's been sort of much fanfare from the government, both in the Conservative leadership election and in the last general election, about this new points-based system, which sort of made us immigration lawyers both laugh and roll our eyes at the same time. But tell us exactly what's changing, what's happening in terms of the new points-based system from January 2021.
Yeah, we do wince, don't we, when we're told about a new points-based system, despite having had one since 2008. Essentially, the new system for sponsored workers is going to be broadened out. This is a reaction, obviously, to Brexit and the fact that this pool of workers potentially coming from the EU under free movement rules is no longer going to exist. And I was looking at the figures. The latest available figures showed that the gross migration from the EU up to September 2018 was 200,000. So that's, potentially 200,000 fewer workers in the labour market. Now, I know that, the timings kind of certainly been affected by the pandemic, and labour requirements are going to reduce in the future, but things will get back to normal. And so what the government's done is it's made it easier to sponsor overseas workers, and remember that means EU citizens as well as non-EU citizens from the 1st of January 2021. So the mechanism for doing that, there's a few things. They've reduced the kind of skill level that you need to have in a worker. Previously, it was kind of graduate level, so what we call RQF 6 or above. Now it's going to be RQF 3 or above, which is generally equivalent to kind of A-level standard positions. There's going to be the removal of the cap. There's a cap on numbers in certain instances that exist at the moment. That's going to go from January, and the salary rates have been adjusted for what we call experienced staff. At the moment, it's kind of a £30,000 salary threshold. It's obviously quite high. It's above the average earnings index for the UK. So it's coming down to kind of a going rate salary or a baseline, what the government's calling a baseline salary of 25,600. But it's going to be possible to sponsor people at an even lower salary than that. The actual floor is going to be 20,480, and it's going to be possible to sponsor people at that salary where there are other criteria that are met.
And in terms of the points themselves, a lot of the detail, and for people who are watching, are set out in the UK points-based immigration system further details document, which came out in July 2020. I'll put a link for that because you can have a look at the tables for yourselves. But just to give us a sort of broad overview, what are the sort of points requirements that what are the points makes prizes of the new rules?
Yeah, so you're going to need to get to score 70 points to qualify as a sponsored overseas worker. You get 50 points for what are called non-tradable aspects of the points system. So that's for your job offer at an appropriate salary rate at the required skill level and you get points for English language as well. Then there are going to be tradable points, and you would use these to make up the remaining 20. So you've got 50, you need to get to 70 to actually be a sponsored worker. So these tradable points, they might be based on a salary that's above the baseline and the threshold salaries that I've already mentioned. It might be because your job's in a shortage occupation. So the government publishes a list and it's contained in the immigration rules of what it considers are shortage occupations. So you can score an extra 20 points just by being in one of those categories. There are other kind of more minor ways to score your extra 20 points if you've got a PhD, for example, in a relevant subject. But that's kind of a simplified version of it, really, Adam.
No, that's really helpful, and people can go away and look at the minutiae of the details themselves. And are there any special sort of categories and provisions? We've heard much of the government talking about making things easier for healthcare workers, particularly in the light of the pandemic. Any special categories the government have announced?
Yeah, so it did that in August. It introduced a health and social care visa, which is it's essentially a fast track visa. It's going to be easy to get. The employer's going to have to pay slightly lower visa fees. They're not going to have to pay the immigration health surcharge, which is quite a significant aspect of application fees in this area. One of the criticisms of the health and social care visa is that it's not open to care workers. They're not included on this kind of exhaustive list of healthcare professionals who are going to be eligible for that visa.
And what about unsponsored? This is obviously a sponsored route that replaces the old tier 2. Are the government planning any sort of unsponsored routes under the new system?
Yeah, they're proposed. They're not going to be enforced from January. What the government has talked about is a highly skilled unsponsored work route. There's going to be a cap on numbers in that route. They've not really published any details of that, so it's presumably going to be launched sometime in 2021. It's going to be interesting to see how that kind of interacts with the existing global talent and global promise visa that, as the name suggests, it's for particularly highly skilled individuals. We don't really know how far below the global talent thresholds those highly skilled workers are going to be. So that's to be confirmed. And then the other main unsponsored category is going to be the graduate worker visa. So it's individuals who've done degree level study, completed a degree or postgraduate qualification here in the UK from summer 2021. They're going to be able to get this essentially a post-study visa. It's going to be valid for 2 years. They're going to be able to work in any job they want at any skill level. One of my concerns really about that is that I know what happened with the old post-study work visa, which was exactly the same as this, and the government decided to withdraw it after a couple of years because they felt it was being abused, because graduates were getting jobs in petrol stations and stacking shelves in supermarkets and didn't feel it was being used appropriately. So we'll see how that goes.
No, absolutely. It's fascinating how that's come back after it was withdrawn because of these allegations of abuse. So it's really interesting, about that. And what about, you mentioned highly skilled, any options for the lower skilled? What have they said about that in terms of
nothing really general, is there? There's a couple of sectors. There's a sectors-based scheme for agricultural workers, which is already in existence. Beyond that, at the moment, it's going to be interesting to see how things pan out. Really, see if there are going to be very manifest shortages of labour in certain sectors, which the government might then address by introducing perhaps new sectors-based schemes. I suppose the care sector. I mean, my daughter's been working as kind of a peripatetic carer before she's started university just over the last few months, and it's very interesting to see how that sector operates. Very high turnover of staff, and it's very subject to very low pay rates as well. So it's difficult to see how those kind of workers and those kind of employers are ever going to, take advantage of the sponsored work scheme when the salary thresholds are what they are.
No, absolutely. And it'd be interesting to see how the government respond to sort of the needs of certain business sectors. Certainly reading their policy paper, they seem to think it can be made up by migrant labour or those who've benefited under the settlement scheme. But I think we'll have to wait and see there.
Yeah.
Definitely.
The other part of the government, the government's approach here is that they charge employers what's called an immigration skills charge when they employ an overseas worker. It's about just over £300 per year of visa, £1,000 per year of visa for a larger employer. And the idea of that is to encourage apprenticeships for resident workers. If young people who are living in the UK. So they are trying to kind of plug those gaps, I suppose, in different ways. But the practicalities will, probably take over, I think, and we'll see how that works.
And in terms of advising employers, you said earlier that you thought it actually made it easier for employers. If you had an employer come to you today who'd previously relied, say, on EU workers and hadn't had a sponsor license, what sort of things would you be advising them now? The sort of practical steps to put into place to be ready for the changes?
Yeah, so the government's encouraging employers to apply for licenses where they've not already got a license to sponsor overseas workers. So I would echo that really and say it's probably a good idea to do it now, because there's going to be a rush, I suspect, at the end of the year or the start of next year. The other thing, I suppose, for employers is to be aware that although the government's talking about a lighter touch for what's called sponsor compliance, it's still going to be, there is still going to be a compliance regime there, and employers who want to apply for a license are going to have to get their HR systems in order. They're going to have to make sure their right to work checks, which remember apply to all employees, British resident and overseas employees, that all those checks are in order, that you're doing things right, because a compliance visit, I know from experience, can be quite an intrusive and distressing thing for an employer if they're not ready for it.
No, absolutely. And I suppose for both of us, when we've dealt with revocations or suspensions of sponsor licenses, it's often because people haven't got those systems and things in place, and then they're caught out, when there's this sort of visit, perhaps wasn't such a lighter touch visit, but yeah, definitely then it causes difficulties for employers.
The other thing I forgot to mention, Adam, actually at the beginning, and it's something that employers need to bear in mind when they're applying for a license, is the fact that a kind of a formal resident labour market test is going to be that's been abolished, but it's still going to be necessary for an employer to demonstrate through evidence that they've not been able to recruit from the resident workforce. So that's, the government's taken away the formality, this kind of prescriptive labour market test, which, for example, required an employer to advertise a job at Job Centre Plus, which very often wasn't appropriate for more highly skilled positions. So it's good that an employer is going to have the discretion to test the labour market in their own way, maybe through advertising on their own website, and that's all they need to do. But they will need to do it, so don't think that you don't need to establish the need for an overseas worker in the way that you used to.
Yeah, it's still that importance of making the business case for it. No, that's really helpful practical advice. And in general, do you think you've sort of hinted at this, that this is a positive move for employers?
Yeah, I think so. I'm just concerned, I suppose, that the kind of the baseline salaries for a lot of sectors. I'll go back to the care sector. A senior care worker is potentially a sponsored position under the new regime, but care workers generally are not highly paid, so they're not going to get above that salary threshold. It's going to cause a lot of headaches, I think, for employers who are working on very tight margins to employ people under the new skilled worker sponsorship system.
And generally outside the points-based system, in terms of perhaps business people, you mentioned earlier global talent, global promise. What are the sort of other routes that are generally available? And you see people, you know, perhaps those who were entrepreneurs in the past, what are the other sort of avenues potentially available for people?
I mean, I know you've had conversations about the other visa routes, things like startup and innovator visas, but the accessibility of those routes is quite limited, quite tricky. You know, the idea that you need to be endorsed by an external body. Certainly, if you're applying from abroad, it's very difficult to access those kind of services, I suppose, from endorsing bodies. So it's not, you know, it's certainly not taken off in the way that perhaps the government would have wanted it to, and maybe that's something they'll look to address in the future. There are other routes such as the sole representative. So somebody's working for an overseas business and they want to set up a branch or subsidiary in the UK, you know, they might look at the sole representative route. And the kind of unsponsored work routes, they're quite challenging at the moment for you know, for us as immigration advisors, I would say.
No, I think that's spot on. And the difficulties, particularly as we see the government and the Home Office noticing that people have gone down the sole representative route and tightening that up with genuineness tests and really.
I mean, yeah, it's just what happens every time, isn't it? We've seen it with so many visa categories. You know, the old entrepreneur category. It starts as a simple points based. You know, you have this certain qualification, you get those points. You know, you've got this amount of money, you get those points. But then the government gets concerned about abuse and it starts introducing genuineness tests and looking at, you know, more closely at business plans, which, you know, on one level it's reasonable, but it's obviously introduces this element of subjectivity. And we'll wait and see. You know, I'll see how the new skilled worker route goes before it, or how long it goes before they start introducing you know, genuineness and subjective criteria into the mix.
Gary, we're sounding old and cynical.
I'm a cynic. Sorry, I'm really sorry.
and just to close, really, no, it's been really helpful. And I think these really practical stuff for employers and workers to be thinking about. If people and workers and businesses in Manchester or throughout the country want to reach out to you, how's the best way to contact you to discuss further?
I'll visit our website, latitudelaw.com. My details and all the other team's details. We've got, you know, we've got a strong team here here at the Manchester office, and you know, we're very happy to advise.
No, Gary, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really helpful. And I suppose for all of us, it's watch this space as further details come. But at least I think our conversation today has given people an idea of what's coming and the sort of practical steps that need to be taken to prepare people for 2021, particularly with the economic challenges that we all face at the moment.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me back, Adam.
Thanks very much for your time, Gary. All the best.
Okay, bye-bye.